Hunter, thank you for coming back on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. It's been a minute. I forget when I was on the first time. But dude, I'm really appreciative and grateful. I have a lot of respect for what you do. Big fan, so I'm excited to chop it up today.
It's always cool. And like I first met you through Lee Taft's mentorship, and it's really cool to see some of the people in that group, you and Hopkins in particular, as far as like what you're doing years down the line now. And it's awesome. And the other part of it is like the people that were in the mentorship ended up like they're the people that end up doing things later on, right? Like it is that kind of drive to want to succeed more and want to do more. And actually, when I see your stuff on Instagram, I'm like, this dude has like a relentless pursuit of excellence, just a drive. So I guess what what makes you want to be that type of impactful coach where you are just putting in the work?
Yeah, dude. Well, first of all, I appreciate the kind words. And well, let's break that down a little bit, which is like, okay, what qualities does it take for you to enter a mentorship like Lee's? Like, let's visualize what that is. Well, that's a certain amount of money a month, and then we're meeting once a week, I think is what we did, right?
Yeah.
And so for a coach to go, I'm going to invest my own money, number one. Number two, I'm going to create the time and block my calendar to make this a priority because, we have all these priorities in our life. Three, I'm going to then apply some of this stuff so I can come back next week and ask more questions. Dude, that's a very special kind of coach, I think, in my opinion. And that person is humble enough to go, I want to go learn from an expert and learn how he makes decisions. And I want to ask questions and apply. So I feel like anybody who's in that mentorship or any mentorship to begin with, they have certain qualities why they're there. And I think the antithesis of that would be you get in, you think you know things in the industry, you're having some success, and then you're like, you know what, fuck it. I don't need to learn from anybody else. Like I have all the answers, right? And I just knew from a very young time in my career that the only thing that helped me separate myself was education, connection, community, and application. And so that's what I think to answer your question about the greatness piece is just focus on doing those things very often. And then when you learn, oh, I'm experiencing success. Like people think that's when like you've made it and now you stop doing that shit. And I'm just like, no, man, that's what got me here. So I'm going to do more of that shit. And that's probably what you're picking up on. And I pick up on from you too. So it's like, if there's a listener here who's like trying to figure out how to build their career in personal training, strength conditioning, rehab pros, yeah, dude, that investment in education is the separating factor, you know?
Yeah. I mean, but like I see you you're right about like surrounding yourself with good people too. I see you're like with Kyle Dobbs at Compound Performance, and you're somewhere else in the country with another coach. And all of these coaches are people I'm like, wow, I really respect all of these guys a ton, but you've made connections with all of them too. Yeah,
Yeah. So I was just talking to somebody about this the other day. So how do you select your mentors? I guess is a good question, right?
sure.
And I
Yeah.
and I've always selected them based on, oh, that's somebody that I love what they're doing. I want to be there one day. So I'm going to approach them. And dude, like I'm the king of getting in people's DMs. Like Lee Taft, man, I just hit him up on Instagram. Hey man, how can I learn from you? Okay, here's the mentorship. Kyle Dobbs, I was in his first mentorship cohort. Kyle Dobbs came into my work in New York City as like a fake client. They were doing research for a gym they were opening, wanted to see what we were doing. So I met him that way and then just
That's hilarious,
pretty
by the way.
much, yeah, just got myself near him all the time. But every mentor I've had, they've made a huge impact on who I am. And I've selected them carefully, and then guess what? I've paid them money, So it's like the mentorship isn't free, but yeah. And then you just try to keep connections with those people. So if I'm in St. Louis, like I'm gonna hit up Kyle. If I'm in Florida, I'm gonna hit up Lee. If I'm in DC, I'll hit up Darius. So it's like you build relationships, and these people actually, real mentors want to see you succeed, I think is the thing too, because it's a mark on if what they're doing is actually making an impact. So that's just how I've always gone about it.
For sure. You made a post and you could take it as either like business related or even like training related. But you referenced the term stringing wins together and how there being no shortcuts. I guess just expand on that a little bit and how
Yeah.
you kind of do that within even business and within your like the workouts, the things that you're doing training wise.
Yeah, so let's start with no shortcuts. So that whole idea came from a podcast I was watching with Alex Hermosi and Chris Williamson, and it's this idea that, like, okay, like we are always thinking about our pursuit. Like, this is where I want to get. Obviously, the first thing we say is we want this to take as quick as possible to get there, right? And so the idea of having no shortcuts is really that the only way that you can build success in life and business is that you need to have the confidence. Anytime you take a risk, there's fear immediately, right? The fear is there. It's like, I'm going to take a risk. There's a fear of failure. There's a fear it doesn't go how I want it to. That translates into worry, right? And so the worry and the discomfort stops people a lot of the time from taking those moves and building true self-confidence, right? So the no shortcuts means you can't remove that fear and that worry and that risk in order to get the success, right? So we think, what if I could just circumvent that a little bit, and this magic product or this mentorship or this fill in the blank will help me get there quicker? But it's a fallacy. It doesn't exist. There's no way to circumvent that. So then enter stacking wins, right? So stacking wins means, dude, I mentor so many coaches now, and they want to get to certain goals, and a lot of the times they set themselves up for failure. So that means, like, okay, this is the goal I want to get to, and it's a very hard, high-reaching goal, and they haven't stacked the appropriate wins up to get there
Sure.
yet. So they're like here, and they're like, oh, I want to make this massive jump to X, whatever that is. You could fill in the blanks. I want 100 I want 100 people on my training program. I want 100 YouTube subscribers. I want to make 100 grand. I'm just using 100 as a round number, but
Yeah,
whatever
sure.
it is, they haven't really stacked what it takes to be there yet. So stacking wins is like, and I work with coaches on doing this in a weekly basis, monthly basis, right? Let's get clear on what you want to accomplish, what your end goal is, and then sub goals. How do we start to stack those up there? It's just like a macro cycle, micro cycle, and training. How do we stack those to get here? And when we start to engineer this, so we get people in a winning formula, which means it's small incremental wins over time equals goal. But if we go, okay, we try to shoot a little high and then we fail, there's no way, nowhere to build progress on. So stacking wins is simple. How do we break this elephant sized goal down into bite sized pieces? And how do we start to eat that on a daily basis so that we can accomplish it? And we just know there's no shortcut to that, right? And as soon as we take that fallacy out of our minds that there's a quicker way to do it, the better. And then let's get clear on what the action plan is. So those are the stacking wins and the no shortcuts.
And I think too, it's like you say like, all right, this is my goal in a year. And when you look at it, it could be really difficult to do. And I think just looking at that one single goal, it would take a ton of focused effort every single day if that is just the only endpoint versus like, all right, in a month, I'm going to do this. And then the next month, I'm going to do this. And like you said, stacking those wins too. And I think thinking about it that way, you build a level of confidence too. And so much of reaching goals is about like having a certain level of confidence in your own ability, no matter what that is. And if you're never hitting any goals necessarily, it's hard to maintain that kind of long-term focus.
Yeah, your confidence gets trashed. Is the result. But I think that you're hitting on a really important point right now, which would be a sub point. for me, which is that what I've learned is that being as clear as you possibly can be on what that one thing is, and then driving all of your effort into pursuit of that one thing is the recipe, right? So it's like, for me, that's a daily reflection. And how does my reflection look? Well, it's kind of loose. It's like, at some point during the day, I'm probably going to look at a journal, like pen and paper, or I'm going to voice note, or I'm going to look at my to-do list, or I'm going to talk to myself and look crazy in my backyard. But I'm going to be going like, okay, am I directionally going in the right way? What needs to get done to service that goal? And if I reflect every day, then I can make changes in my behavior quicker, right? And so that's what we're talking about. We're speaking the same language, but it's reflection daily, versus like reflection after a month of, okay, did I hit it or not? That's very important. Clarity on the goal, and then having all of your actions service that one thing. Don't major in the minors, so to speak.
When you do reflections, are you looking back at those past like a day? Like, are you looking back a week, a month, a year, or is it like you said, the tool of like, all right, I'm going to get out my thoughts right now. It helps me come up with like a clear idea of what I need to do tomorrow.
Yeah, so there's several ways you can do this. What I would tell you to start with is, so at the event we were talking about Camp Savage, we teach people how to journal. We physically give them journals. We physically create the time for them in the morning to do it. We physically bring them back together to talk about it. And then, we check in, 6 months, a year later, who has kept that behavior up? And you know what the answer is? 5%, right? And so why do people struggle with reflecting a lot? In my opinion, people are scared of what they're going to write on that paper, which means, shit, I didn't do it this week. Shit, I've just kind of been screwing around. Something massive in my life happened that derailed me, whatever it is, right? So the goal of reflection is more to just take stock of how you're actually feeling that day, what's important for you to get done, and reflect on past days and future days. Now, to your point, how I do it, there's been a lot of different iterations. How I do it now is in my computer. Every Sunday, I sit down, and the first thing I do when I wake up, I get my coffee, and then I just start typing, like, foreshadowing for the week, what I think is most important to get done. And so then I go back to the previous week, and I look at what I said was the most important thing to get done that week. And I look at what I did every day. So everything I do every day, I type out. Like, it's like meeting, this podcast is on that to do, whatever. It's like everything can be looked at as far as what happened last week. Anything that I didn't get done, I keep in bold. Anything I do gets unbolded, right? So on that Sunday, I look back, and then I project forward. And then on a daily basis, I'm just trying to stay in that day. And if I don't get something done, I'll move it to the next day, or 2 days from now, or 3 days from now. But that's how I keep my head on straight as far as like what's most important right now. How's it getting done? And there's a lot of like daily, weekly reflection on those points. I never used to do this because I was in survival mode back in the day. Like, when you have to just like do shit to survive, dude, there's no reflection, there's no forethought, it's just like, gotta go to the gym, train 10 people, all right, let's get that coffee and let's go do it, right?
Yeah.
But the
Yeah.
next level of becoming an operator is strategy and understanding. I heard one quote which was amazing, which is like, the only difference between successful people and people that want to experience successes, if you're successful, and I know on a weekly basis, like, I can complete, let's call it 20 tasks, and those tasks have gotten done and I was able to take action quickly. But let's say the other person was only able to get 2 tasks done. In this case, this is like a strength coach or a personal trainer training sessions all week. In the in between time, trying to like give some effort, they only get
Yeah.
2 things done. I got 20. Well, then we put a month together. You got 8. I got 80. So I was 10 times more productive just by having some forethought on that. And I think that's what we're talking about when we talk about reflection.
Well said. Now you mentioned your event at Camp Savage. Let's talk about that a little bit because it is and this is just what it comes from the outsider, a holistic well-being event where it includes everything, mind, body, everything. I guess tell me about the creation of this event and then I guess just more details about it.
Yeah, so let's start here, which means so this is the underlying main theory behind not just that event, but everything that I do now. So early in my career, I was a trainer, so I was specifically focused in a coach, and so I was focused on the physical, right? But how many interactions do you have with clients, one-on-ones, groups, whatever? They're telling you all of the problems in their life. They're telling you their relationships, their work struggles, their child struggles, whatever that is. They're telling you all of this shit. And so a lot of us are filling a psychological emotional bucket that we don't realize we're really focusing. And our job is more expansive than just physical training. And as you go on in your career, you realize that in order for people to get peak performance results from your training, they need to sleep, right? They need to eat well. They need to have good social connections. They need to have some emotional discipline. We call it like mental performance, right? And so the idea behind what I do is like the human is super complex. We get all this, right? And the high value coaches realize how complex it is and can make interventions in different buckets. So the events are like, okay, we say that. Let's not just be lip service. How are we going to try to make some positive interventions with the people who come throughout the weekend? So like I told you, here's how we do it. So number one, community and social interaction. Everybody's stuck behind their phone nowadays, right? So a lot of the communication is via text, IG message, email. How many people are really interacting with people with their same values on a daily, weekly basis where they're getting support, interaction, and hanging out? The answer is pretty little nowadays. So we
Yeah,
try to
very little.
yeah, so we try to create that. You're going to be sleeping in the same bunks with 50 people, hanging out for 3 days, making relationships. So that social connection is important. Physical side of things, like we have experts in the realm, myself included, on training. So we have at this one, we have a 17,000 square foot performance facility that has racks and kettlebells and recovery modalities. So it's like, here, let's do some workshops on training. Then my secret weapon is my friend Johnny Martin, who he specifically works with combat veterans and the mental performance side of things. And let me tell you about special forces and military, man. Like the high level operators are in tune with their mental performance. So if they are in tune with their mental performance, and every sports team has a psychologist, why are we so resistant to digging in on the mental side of things to get more performance out of ourselves? I don't get it. So I'm like, let's bring in Johnny. Let's talk about values. Let's talk about beliefs, identity. Let's talk about negative self-limiting beliefs. Let's talk about all the shit that's under the hood that's holding you back right now from doing what you want to do. So community, physical, mental, emotional, and then finally, like we bring in massage therapists, people with recovery sides of things. Because when I take you for 3 days and put you through the ringer physically and mentally, well, we better help you recover along the way. And so recovery is a huge piece of it. And you know, when you train somebody, like if I got you 1 hour a day, but you're not recovering the other 23, like it's going to hurt our results working together, you
Yes.
know? And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the idea of camp. It's really an adult summer camp. This year, we're literally running it on UHP's grounds. UHP, their sole focus is taking transitioning combat veterans and putting them through a curriculum to become personal trainers. So they have it all. Their operations, they have a lot of like team building exercises. Think about like the show The Amazing Race meets like special force boot camp. Like you're going to have to solve a riddle while carrying a log across a field, swim through a river, and take a compass and get yourself here, capture the flag, come back, like that kind of shit. strewn throughout the weekend, right? And so that's kind of what we're trying to create.
Well, you suffer together, you create a bond. That's for sure. I think it was like the very first Spartan races. It was like there was no end. Like you didn't know how long it was going to be. And they would set it up or be like, all right, you and like three other people get some two by fours. Everyone's attaching their feet to the two by fours. You got to march up this mountain.
Yeah.
All right, great. Now you got to come down. You got to fire one bullet. If you don't hit the target, you got to march back up the mountain again. There's like something crazy like that. But there is something about like suffering together and doing hard stuff together like that. Um,
Yeah, dude.
the other thing you kind of talked about was like the community part. And I think about this with my kids all the time. It's like, who are my kids' friends? Who's in their friend group? Because they have just as big of an impact, if not a bigger impact than me as the parent on how they do at school, what they're focused on, like all of that stuff. So
Yeah.
the idea of like surrounding yourself with good people, and like the same thing could be said with like the mentor group. You will get way more out of it because then when you show up the next week, you check in with all these people. Everyone feels like they got to do something to be accountable to themselves and the group when they come back. So I love that.
Yeah, and if you wanted to know like where I'm really spending a lot of my time now, it's on that. It's on who are the people in my life? What's the environment I'm setting up in my life? And that's not easy, dude, to set up in a community, by the way, because I don't want a
No.
community. I don't want a community that's based on like, oh yeah, we're all friends. I want a community where it's like we're friends because we triumphed over that adversity together, like you said.
Yeah.
And so that requires that you actually put those kind of obstacles and challenges in um, the programs, the mentorships, whatever it is. And we find like, dude, we got people who come through a cohort, all of a sudden they're flying across the country to see each other, you know? So in the beginning, we didn't know what's the depth of relationship you can get online. And now we know like when these people meet coming offline, they're thick as thieves in person, which is really cool to see.
Yeah. It's, I mean, good for you for creating a message that says, these are the type of people I'm looking for. Because you really like, you're not necessarily targeting everyone because you want a certain type of mentality to have in the community to keep growing the community.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your KBCU coaches certification. There's a million certs out there. What makes this one different than other ones, would you say?
Yeah. Great question. I would break it into four differentiating factors. So I designed this, by the way, after going to tens tens of certifications, 10, 20, 30. I don't know the exact number, but we've all gone to the 2 day seminar, right? And there's huge holes in that. What are the holes? Well, the first is that if I take you for 2 days and pour information at you for 8 hours each day, how much can you really retain? You know, like I feel like you get inspired, you take a few things, but
Yeah.
like,
Especially when it's like eight completely separate topics, right?
yeah. And so I was like, I want to have more time with people because the reality is, recall and depth of knowledge takes time. It's just like training. You got to like be exposed to it. So we go, now we're up to 16 weeks. We started at 8 weeks, bumped it to 12. Now we're at 16. That's like our perfect time frame. We do two certifications in that 16 weeks. So you get level one, level two, foundations, and then more advanced. That's programming, exercise execution, coaching. You also coach your classmates through this process. So we have plenty of time with people. Number two, you know, at these seminars, I would connect with one or two people I was partnered with for the weekend, but I was like, how the hell do we link this whole group together? Right. Like if there's 20 people in a room, like one of the mentorships we were talking about, and everybody in that room is spectacular and smart and can give information or support to everybody in that group. How do we link that? There's a problem there. People enter with egos sometimes. People don't want to make friends, you know? So you really have to set up the stage to kind of bring that ego down, make it safe and inviting. So a differentiator is like, dude, we have deep relationships within, and it's because we spend time together, but we engineer it so community is a huge value. Number three, it's not just a system, dude. Like you go to these certs, it's like, here's my system, you know? And this is not just one system. This is like all of the systems I've learned, and then I put them through battle tested with my clients. Like what emerged as good stuff to me. So I stole from here, 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 and I present it as here is like a holistic approach. And number four, I think that trainers usually gravitate to what they're good at. So you have some trainers who are power lifters who are super strong, but if I ask them to jump or sprint or jump on one leg, they'd be SOL. That was me. Then you have other trainers who are good at mobility, who are yogis or in the mobility world, but lack in the strength department. Then you have people who are good at cardio who run distance or are involved in like high rocks or whatever, but they don't have any exposure to plyos or athletic training. So like we really focus on developing well-rounded people with exposure in all of those buckets, which is uncomfortable at first because like you're not going to be good at it. But that's the differentiation is number one, longer exposure. Number two, community. Number three, not one system, but a holistic approach on training. And then number four, how do we become well-rounded? And I'd say that's the differentiator. It's really more of an experience and kind of a like a launch point than it is here's some shit to go learn for 2 days and go home, you know?
I like the idea of not an exact system because once you tie yourself to that, then you're kind of stuck with that.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, oh, this other thing actually kind of works pretty well.
Yeah. But
You got to stick with the
that's,
system. Yeah.
yeah. And that's the problem. What happens when you name it Kettlebell Coach University, dude? Like, what, okay, if I could go back, would I change it? No. Because in order for you to draw heat, you have to niche down to some level, which
You
means what do
do.
I know? What do I know you for? But then once we niche down, it was like, yeah, but I still train with barbells. I still jump. I still run. I still train with body weight. So then how do we let these other things become a showcase, you know, as well as the kettlebell? Kettlebell is always going to be like here. If you gave me a training program, there would be kettlebells in it in some extent. The question is how much and when, and you have to know that as a coach. So I have to teach them that.
Let's talk about then combining kettlebell training with speed and plyos because you said yourself didn't really excel at that initially.
No.
I know you've been putting in the work. So I guess
No, I didn't.
how do you go
Yeah.
about that with, we'll say general population first, and
Hmm.
then we'll talk about athletes, like what might change with that.
Okay, so let's look at it like this. Let you, and you could break down any task like this, but let's start with running, right? So what do you need to run, right? Well, you need some single leg strength, you need some elasticity, you need some hip IR, ER, you need some thoracic rotation, you need good abs, you need like there's maybe one or two other things we could say, but that's how I look at a task, right? What do I need to do that? So then if the person doesn't want to run, then walking is down the line from that, or walking upstairs, or, you know, just generally going for a hike. That's still kind of the same qualities as running, but not to the same extent. Then we shift it to the right. Okay, you want to go play an athletic game that's actually competitive, right? That's to the next thing. But if you understand these tasks and how you're going to train them, then those become the qualities that you need to train. And the tool is a service to those qualities that I need to train, right? So, how do I scale it? If a 60-year-old walked into me right now, the buckets that I needed to fill just for them to live their life are not all that different than the buckets that I need to fill for an 18-year-old athlete. The intensity and the volume at which I need to do those are a little different. But for example, you still need elasticity and sword release at the Achilles. So, like, if you're a 60-year-old, you may put your hands against the wall and do some fast calf raises where your heels don't leave the ground. And if you're an athlete, you may do tuck jumps, right? So there's a continuum that you understand as far as difficulty, but I think tying it back to the task is really important. So like I don't shield my 60-year-olds from doing box jumps or doing sit to stand jumps or wall pogo hops or banded pogo hops or jump roping. Like, dude, that's how I made money during the pandemic. I taught every older person how to jump rope. Simple thing, but like if you're 60 and you can jump rope, you're a weapon compared to somebody
Absolutely, yeah.
who's 60 and their feet can't leave the ground. Do you know what I mean? It's simple, but like it's very impactful.
That's awesome. I guess regarding like kettlebell training, you have an athlete come in. Are
Mm.
you starting them with kettlebells before you would move to a barbell for most things? Because in general, people think like, oh, we'll goblet squat first, then we'll progress to a barbell. I find even pressing with a kettlebell is way easier and gets people in a better position than pressing with a dumbbell.
Yeah. So this could honestly be a podcast topic itself, I think, as far as like what the opinions are about selecting the right tools for the right interventions. But this is what I'd say my answer is. Like, I feel like the kettlebell is extremely effective if I'm teaching you general competencies, right? Like, if I can take that kettlebell, if you can't deadlift well, I can just raise it up to a little block. Now I made it a little bit of an elevated deadlift. You can
Simple.
do that.
Yeah.
Then I bring it down to the floor, and then we go kickstand. Then I maybe go to like a single leg deadlift, whatever. I can also do a two-hand deadlift. I can also do a really heavy single arm deadlift. I could do two kettlebells. I could then put them outside the feet and do a trap bar kettlebell deadlift. So there's just so many ways that you can build in the continuum of difficulty that way. But I think what we're really saying is like, does there need to be a hierarchy for when you're teaching a beginner what is the right tool for that? And I would just tell you in my experience, like, okay, if you work with kids, right now I work at a high school and train kids anywhere between 14 and 18 years old, and they don't have a background. If I put a bar on their back, they fold up. It's like they look like an accordion. It's kind of the same the desk worker who comes in who's 50 years old. It's the same kind of thing. Why do they look like an accordion? Well, usually they don't have the foundational strength in the upper back and the abs to really support that load, right? So how do I build that? Well, if you hold a kettlebell here and do a goblet squat, to your point, it's going to reinforce those things, or else you're going to have to drop the shit. So I think I'm not going to tell people like, you have to be able to do 20 goblet squats at this weight
Sure.
before I
Yeah,
give
yeah,
you a
yeah.
bar. But just use your general understanding of the positions you want to get people in. And I bet you the conclusion you'll come to is there's no harm in really just drilling the foundations, getting foundational strength in these patterns. But I think the real win for the kettlebell, there's a few things. The first is that, dude, the reason, like you said, a kettlebell press is different than a dumbbell press is that when I have to squeeze that shit, right, like this and actually squeeze it, the innervation I get all in here and in here is different. You
Yeah.
see people do dumbbell presses, their shit's like this, right? It's like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's like
and
probably the biggest takeaway I got from RKC in like
mm,
2008
yeah,
was they're like, all right, squeeze your fist a little bit. You feel your forearm tighten. Squeeze it harder. You feel like your bicep, your tricep. White knuckle it. You feel huge stability in through your lat and your shoulder.
yeah.
And I've never forgotten that. And I've used that, I don't know how many times since then. Even if someone's doing something without a kettlebell, I'm like, you can squeeze it. Like when people hold something and their grip is like this and their thumbs off the bar, if they're like doing it, I'm like, you're driving me insane. Squeeze that bar.
Yeah. And so that's one thing, like the innervation you get from the windows to the nervous system are the hands and the feet, right? So if I can squeeze that, I get more of a distribution. It's also oblong. So if I hold it here and go for a walk, I'm going to train this trunk, I'm going to train the whole girdle. So just the shape of it, how you have to hold it. But the main one is this: kettlebell training links the breath and teaches people how to be
Mm,
tight when
yeah.
they need to be tight and relaxed when they need to be relaxed. And traditional lifting, when you go in, people that excel, myself included, would be in this bucket. The only strategy is tension. And when you have to teach a kid how to sprint or you have to learn how to jump and run fast, you realize that the people that do that the best, they're not tense. Like they're active right at that moment of impact and they can produce that force, contract, and then totally chill. And that, I think, you could boil down to that's like the achievement of athletic success. Can you contract when you need to? Can you relax? Too much tension equals no good. Kettlebell training is getting you to realize that nice switch between relaxation and tension. Um, and we just find great results with that.
For sure. I've always had it as like I've never truly attempted it. I had a goal of like, all right, I want to get like 100 snatches in 5 minutes with the 28 kilogram.
Yeah.
I did that. And now I'm like, really want to do that with the 32. That's like a whole nother level. But I'm like, geez, that would, if you can do that, you're really freaking fit in a whole bunch of different ways.
Yeah, it's hard. Um, yeah, I would say, look, like people love challenges. I think that's why the early kettlebell certifications were attractive because it was like you got to do 100 in 5 minutes, and so it's clear goal, clear understanding of success and failure. Where I like to use kettlebells, like I still train people for those kind of feats, but dude, think about it like this. What happens if you take an athlete and we only have 5 sets of 5 and we have 45 seconds in between each and it's heavy and they have to give max effort, like that,
Yeah.
that, that is how it shows up in my practice more than, okay, let's take you through like some kind of endurance feat. It's more like this thing is going to teach you how to produce power, produce strength. Let's get that tension and relaxation right. Let's get in good positions that translate over to things like broad jumps and sprinting. And like that kind of fills a different part of the force velocity curve.
Yeah. I've told this on the podcast before, but this was I don't know how many years ago now, probably 6 or 7. I did Pavel's Quick and the Dead protocol. So all I did for like a month was kettlebell snatches. That was literally the only
Yeah.
exercise I did. And you don't do it for high reps. It's kind of like what you said, where you're going fast, but then you take a short break, you do it again, and then maybe you take like another minute or two and you do different series of that. My one arm press went up significantly. My obviously like my kettlebell snatch went up naturally too. My pull-ups went up. Now, I recommend doing more than one exercise over the course of a month. But the point of kind of what you said of like shorter sets, but like really focused effort, you can get a ton out of that.
Well, this is a great topic, Jason, where I go literally back and forth on this all the time. So that is what I learned a lot from Pavel, which is that you don't need much to get what he calls what the hell effects. Why'd my pull up go up? Why'd my press go up? I didn't even do a pull up or a press, but it went up. And so that's literally the definition of getting the most out of the least, right? And so then the question is, why do traditional workouts look like 12 to 14 exercises on different days? And the reality is that what you come to, and why I don't think that style of training caught on, is like, oh, I'm just going to do snatches for the rest of my life. And that's it.
Yeah.
Even if I am getting better, is because there's something to be said for motivation to do new things because it's a new context. And that's what West Side did really well, right? It was like it was just, hey, we're gonna do a box squat this week and it's a banded squat next week, and the following week it's a
Yeah.
front
Still the
squat.
same thing, just a slight difference, right? That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I would say that the consumer or people like to feel challenged and have new endeavors. So how do we keep the majority of the shit the same with a little bit of tweak from week to week? Change the movement prep up. People don't even notice it's the same shit if the movement prep changes and maybe the conditioning's a little different. But keep the main stuff, drive that home for long periods of time. That's where adaptation comes from. But yeah, like try to sell a program that's just snatches and pull-ups if you're not Pavel. You know what I mean? It's like,
Good luck.
so
Yeah,
you just got to bridge the gap a little bit, I would say.
for sure. What are you training for right now?
Great question. So dude, this is another thing I think about all the time. So I have this idea of, and it's large. It's kind of along the Peter Attia lines. Although I gotta be honest with you, Peter Attia and Huberman bore the fuck out of me. Like I can't sit for 3 hours and listen to that shit. But my understanding of of Peter Attia's general outline is creating somebody who's well-rounded. Okay, so what does that mean on a week-to-week basis of what is the simplest stuff I need to check off to be getting closer to my goals? Like what's my process? This is how I
Get a
think about it.
rucksack.
Yeah, you could. But ultimately I
Yeah,
think it breaks
yeah.
down into 2 to 3 high intensity lifts that are kind of either upper and lower or full body, and you hit each muscle group at least 4 sets. Like that's the general recommendation. It on paper it's pretty simple, but 2 to 3 of those. Then one day a week specifically interval anaerobic based cardio, and the other day a week longer duration, like you said, rucksack. I don't have one of those, but like I either
I
get on
don't
the
either. But yeah,
stairmaster or go for a long walk or go for a run. But anaerobic, aerobic, strength. That's kind of, I try to get 5 days in a week, 2 full days off. And that's just like my process. Now, like what I like about that is if I do that and a goal does come up, then I can just quickly go, okay, what needs to change to go directly for that goal? So last year I ran a marathon. I never in my life thought I would run a marathon. Really had no interest. Even now, I have no interest in ever doing it again. But I wanted to learn aerobic adaptation at a really high level. The only way you can do that, in my opinion, is if you buy a watch and you look at your heart rates and you understand zones and like
true.
that kind of shit.
Yeah,
So what I'm saying is I have a template for myself that if I get those 5 days done, then down the road, any goal. But right now I have no goals. My main goals are my business and my daily life and my wife, and we're trying to build a family. We just moved. Like there's enough shit I got to do on a daily. uh where like last year, man, I was running 4 times a fucking week. So it was like 4 hours a week are just going towards this goal. I'm not getting paid for this goal.
you're not built like an
This
endurance athlete
No,
either.
that's why I was excited. I was like, try to
Yeah,
run in a marathon at 2:30, man. It's a different level of hard. But yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is like early on I always was searching for a goal to train for. And now I'm like, yeah, if I compete in a powerlifting competition, that wouldn't service my professional or business goals or my life goals, really. Like, I don't think. And if something comes up where I want to challenge myself, I'll do that. But I love that template of 5 days a week. I really have put a lot of thought into that, and it ties into all of the recommendations for aerobic activity you need, strength you need, anaerobic you need, and that's how start to get that in.
sure. I'm with you. 5 days for me is that sweet spot. If I get an extra day, it's usually just like something light, but nothing crazy. But like 5 really good days, I feel really good doing that.
Yeah, I
What's
agree.
next for KBCU?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's simple. I want our students to be able to fly into any city in the world and have somebody that they could call up and go get a training session and break some bread with. So in the future, global expansion, we already have students in like Switzerland, Italy, France, Portugal, small amount, but how do we continuously grow worldwide where we have a community that supports itself and each other? So that's really the vision and the goal. How we do that is going to be decided by what people want. But that's what I'm going to keep working for the next 20, 30 years every day on, because I believe in it, man. Is like, how do we create a positive impact? How do we align with what we want to do? Well, I just want to coach people and get to know them. And if they get empowered and they change their lives, dude, like mine changes because, I learn from every person I work with. So that's really the goal in the future.
Tell everyone where they can find you, reach out to you,
Yeah,
find your
man.
stuff.
Grab me on Instagram, Hunter Dash Crine. Our first coaching certification for the year just filled up. We'll have another one in September. We're also going to be in person for our foundations course, New York in March, Arkansas in May, Chicago in May, and then Seattle in October and Orange County in November. So we'll be around in all those cities as well. You can come get a taste of what we're talking about today.
That is awesome. And it's awesome to see what you're doing and what you're growing. It's great stuff.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one, Hunter.
You too, man.